go over this again. So Kristina Kuprina doing the update on the economy since the last time I spoke. Also, Katie Linfeld, our certified financial planner at Sequoia, will be joining us shortly, and she's going to talk a bit about some planning tips and ideas to take advantage of some opportunities in 2020 and beyond. First, I wanted to say that I'm going to talk a bit about kind of a recap to the elections. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about COVID because I had a lot of questions in that, and also kind of an economic update where we are now. And I'm going to start with I got some interesting comments after the last webinar about the fact I was wearing blue and if I was messaging or signaling something. And the answer is no, I was not. I simply had blue nail polish, so picked a blue shirt to wear to go with it. And in no way it was signaling anything. However, today I am signaling. I decided to wear purple because we have become a purple nation as a result of the election. The American people essentially as one giant organism said, we want peace and quiet. Anyway, that's sort of my take on it. Peace and quiet. They didn't give too much control to one party or the other. They wanted change, but not too much change. And while I know the results are still being worked out specifically on the Senate, none of them will probably make a big change economically to anything that I'm reporting today. Whether the Senate goes, the two remaining seats go blue, they go red, or they split 50-50, probably will not make much change to anything I'm talking about today. I have gotten a lot of questions around this, so I will address the elephant in the room, which is the questions have been, what happens if Donald Trump doesn't concede? Is this going to do, what will this do to the economy? What will it do to the nation, et cetera? And at this point, it's not going to make much difference and I'll tell you why. And again, speaking as an economist, first off, he doesn't have to. The process will be its own. States will certify the election. The electors will vote, if I'm using the proper terminology, and we will move on as a nation. His desire to have the vote validated or to check and make sure there was no fraud or miscounted votes or the like, I don't know, again, on all the accusations there, is actually a very good thing for our nation, is the fact that we're testing our economy. We're testing our nation. We're testing our voting systems. We're strengthening the integrity of the process in doing so. So going through this process is healthy to again, validate the results of the election. I do not see any realistic scenario where anything that may or may not be discovered is going to change the outcome of the presidential election. So at this point, I don't see that as an economist. Just the numbers just don't seem to work. Again, sorry if I shook anybody up there with that, starting off with that subject. I'm sure in the somewhat tense for a lot of people, but I do want to address that from the economic perspective, is that it's a good thing to go through the process. We will still have a president as planned in all scenarios that I can see at this point, and it's almost certainly going to be Joe Biden. So what we got is a purple situation, and a purple situation will have one of two possible economic outcomes. One, nothing gets done. Both sides are at war with each other and we go into gridlock. The other one is that they will learn to work together. I mean, if they really look at it, then the nation voted and the nation made changes, and the changes were work together, right? Figure this out, not to one extreme, not to the other extreme, work together. And we already seen signs, even with the uncertainty surrounding everything, we're already seeing signs that's happening. With my contacts in Washington, there's a lot of working together going on. There's a lot of behind the scenes talking and trying to figure this out, organize and plan and prepare, especially around the stimulus. So everything is moving forward, and you can see the results of that of the markets. The markets have been to see beyond just what's going on right now into the future. I just want to make sure I touch upon all those bases. So what does a purple nation mean to the economy? As I said, things are going to get done. A lot of the things that Biden talked about will be done, primarily likely, very highly likely, it's been said, rejoining the Paris Accord, if I'm using the proper terminology there, unwinding a lot of the executive orders and a lot of the rules of the soon-to-be previous administration. These things will happen. None of them have a significant economic impact at this point. So again, from a political standpoint, it was certainly an interesting election, and there's certainly some uncertainty surrounding it, but it probably will not much change things going through the end of 2020 into 2021. I've actually decided that I think we should create a new political party, not to offend any Democrats or Republicans out there, and call it the Purple Party, just for everybody that likes purple, and some balance there. I think that a new party would be quite fun. So consider the purple party. So that's kind of an overview on the election. Please use the Q&A. Again, thank everyone for poking me when they can see me. Please use the Q&A for questions because I'm going to be speaking less time today to give Katie her time. And then I'll close out everything in the end if more questions pop up. As I can't stress enough, I'm going to go into this in much more detail in the early December meeting. Okay, so check it out. Just quickly on the COVID side of things, because there's a lot of questions about this. There's a lot of concern around another shutdown. Case levels are rising, and there's been talk about shutting down some or all of the economy. A lot of talk about this. I, at this point, believe that's highly unlikely that it's going to happen in a meaningful way. It still is a risk. The reason for this is that we have figured out how to do things better, and we better understand the virus. So we can be more targeted as a nation with the shutdowns and restrictions put in place than we would have been when we didn't know what we were dealing with. Okay, it is very important for the government to get the revenue, and they need the revenue from an open economy. We can only run the deficit up so high before we create a much bigger problems than even COVID. So there's a more thoughtful process on how this might be done. As we head into the winter and more activities are done indoors, there's almost certainly going to be more cases. And it's until the vaccine is widely distributed, it's going to continue to pose challenges to certain segments of the economy. But I think, again, shutting down, it's going to happen. I think the county I'm in right now just got knocked down a peg recently because of rising case rates. I do see that continuing to happen and continue to happen again until the virus is widespread, but not yet a scenario that I see seriously considered in which we would shut down as we did before. It is something I'm watching closely to see how that may play out over time. It is somewhat of a race now between getting the vaccine out there and widely used. And remember, the vaccine that just got approved on Monday, that's there's 5 more in stage FDA for 3 trials. So there's still 5 more coming. And what we may find over time is, even though the one that's been approved has a 90% success rate, we may find over time that some people work better with some types of vaccines than the other. But this is really much more of a 2021 story than a 2022 story. A vaccine that's more widely available will help the people that are more fearful and concerned about the virus to have more confidence going out and doing more and more of their regular activities. It will also be easier for employers to provide a safe workplace, have people back into the office or into the workplace, and not be as concerned about potential spread. As we're seeing at this point, most of the spread seems to be happening in closed quarters indoors, and that's something that we'll need a vaccine, or we're going to need a solution for individuals and businesses to really feel comfortable in those spaces, and especially things like travel and whatnot. Watching that closely, but we really do. Sometimes people talk about politically about how people feel about COVID. It is really much more the level of caution that people have, and of course their underlying conditions and their family members' underlying conditions. But this will be with us for a little while. And when I say a little while, well into next year at this point. And what it's doing is it's going to slow the growth. So we had an amazing third quarter, GDP up 33%. This is amazing, amazing third quarter. But that's not sustainable. That's largely the recovery from a really dismal second quarter. Now this quarter, fourth quarter, we're tracking in somewhere between 3 and 5%. It was 3% last time GDP. I'm getting a little closer to 5% right now. Why is that? It's because we're actually recovering at a pretty good clip. The consumer's leading the way. Fun fact, consumer spending is actually up over this time last year. So even with the no stimulus, or no additional stimulus, and even with the virus still very widespread, consumer spending is actually up. Again, that's one little sector of the economy. Hospitality and leisure actually led the way on the last employment report in new hires. Hospitality and leisure, that's like the one area that's really shut down right now, but it is expanding, it is growing. I've seen it for myself. I've been in Nevada twice in the last 2 months, and I've seen a significant difference in the people that are out and about doing things when I stay there. It's just in 2 months period of time, there's a lot more activity going on in that kind of leisure space, or into that hotel space, I should say. So it's definitely happening again. That's one isolated area, but it's the data shows that it's happening across the nation. So that's kind of pretty much it on the COVID thing. Because I had a question about this, I'll say that COVID is not political. Not It's the scientists and it's the doctors, and I'm saying it's not political because the question that was framed to me was very political. It is the doctors and the scientists that are working on this, but the government is helping as well. Regardless of your feelings about Donald Trump, Operation Warp Speed is really helping a lot. It is helping a lot because of the fact it's much easier to go through the FDA approval process. Okay, so that has been really helpful. In addition to that, yes, Pfizer did pay for everything themselves, all the research and development, but they will be using government money to distribute the vaccine, and they'll be using the advantages of quick approval to get it out there, to get it through the approval process. Why I bring this up is this leads the way for many other drugs and many other therapies beyond COVID. We've opened that gate to show that we can more fast track FDA approval. So think about all of the other diseases and illnesses that we have in this nation that potentially we can find cures more quickly. So this is a big shout out to the government, and this transcends politics and really helping these companies come up with a solution from an economic and as well as a social perspective. On the economic front, I want to get into GDP a bit because we've had such an amazing recovery economically over this last quarter, and it continues on. It's going to slow a bit next year, as defined by GDP. Some sectors that have done very, very, very well in the third 3 quarters of this year are going to start to slow in their growth meaningfully. They're not going to crash, but they're going to slow. Sectors that have been very affected, they're going to start to grow. We saw that start Monday. The rotation is pretty impactful. It's pretty massive, but there's a lot of room to grow. I've said this before, and the number only increases. The amount of cash on hand, the empty money supply, is up 24%. When safe to do so and possible to do so, the growth is going to be significant, but it will take time. So imagine now we have this spike. Imagine now that we're going to start to go across a little more of a slow growth trajectory into 2021, but not all. There are going to be some great areas of growth, great sectors of growth that will grow much more than the overall economy. And that rotation is happening literally as we speak right now, which of course is my job. Questions about that, ask me more specifically, but there's a tremendous opportunity there. 68% of the companies that have already released their earnings for the third quarter have beat expectations. That's a pretty high number. 68% beat expectations. More importantly, they didn't downgrade their expectations during the COVID time. So it's not as if they said in the second quarter, oh, it's going to be really bad, and then it wasn't so bad, but it was still bad. No, they actually were able to keep going throughout this time, 68%. So that's a pretty high number. Unemployment numbers have also been interesting. I have not updated this for today's report, but this is last week's, but it actually got better today. So these numbers are better. The JOLTS report, which is basically job openings, is actually less than 1 million different than the unemployment rate, which means now there are enough jobs available to provide employment for most of the unemployed people. Now, before you get too excited about that, understand that's a national number. So regions obviously differ. If you work in hospitality and leisure, it's going to be tougher to find work than it may be, say, if you work in technology. I have clients right now that are struggling to find workers to fill positions. And in other parts of the country, it's probably the opposite. So this is a very general number, and it depends so much on where you are and what you're doing. In addition, another little added point to that is when the kids need to be home to be remote learning, someone's got to be home with them. And not everybody can afford a nanny or a tutor to come in and be with their kids, which means that there are people that want to work but can't work because they need to be home with the kids to make sure that they're learning properly. That is another factor that when the schools are able to open safely and the kids start going back to school, that also will kick out a lot more people, again, looking for work to available jobs. But there's a lot of wrinkles like that. It's very, very regional, very, very specific. But I did want to talk about that a bit. Okay, again, don't forget questions. I'll pop onto this as well. Let's see. I talked about the money supply that's exploding. I'll talk about a couple of fun facts. The question I get a lot is, when are we going to get back to where we were before COVID? And the answer is somewhere around the end of the first to the beginning of the second half of 2022. So remember I talked about that slow growth. As a nation, when all sectors get there, we've got a ways to go. And we also have the capacity to go well beyond that as well, given the money supply. So there's a lot of opportunity. There are some risks in that because there are some companies and some very large companies that are not going to recover. There's a lot of companies out there with tremendous debt levels, and they're not going to make it through this. There are companies that have not adapted to the use of technology. They're not going to make it through this. There are many, many small businesses that can't function when they don't know if they're going to be open or shut day to day. So there's a lot that are not going to make it through this. I don't want any way this to come across as, oh, everything's perfect and rosy and rainbows and unicorns. There are a lot of challenges. It's very, very important to know what it is you own. And if you're a business owner, it's very important to plan for the fact that everybody's not going to come back and do things the way they did before. 40% of the people that used Amazon for the first time during shelter in place will continue to use Amazon beyond shelter in place. That's pretty meaningful numbers. People aren't going to go back and do things just as they did before, even when the concern or threat around the virus is gone. So planning around this new normal is very important. Technology is what got us through this time in a way that we never would have made it through this time if it had happened 20 years earlier. The fact that we could work remotely, the fact that we could have food and essentials delivered to our homes, the fact that we can do so many of the things that we can do today through technology has made it possible for the economy to recover even in the midst of all of this. But again, a lot of businesses are still trying to adapt to the best use of technology, large and small. It's across the board. It's interesting to see that. And you can see it now in the earnings. You can kind of see it in the details of where the money is being spent, to who's going to be prepared for this new world. Even some companies doing well now will just, they're losing market share. They won't make it through this time. I think I told you leisure and hospitality is the highest employment growth, which was really interesting to me on that. So with that being said, I'm going to talk about a couple of other things. I'm going to answer questions, and then I'm going to hand it off to Katie. And after that, I'll jump back in and answer any other questions anyone has. So again, please ask them. Got some here, so that's cool. Questions you specifically have. So I'm going to quickly check this and make sure miss anything here. So the last part I want to talk about a bit on the economy before I get into the questions, and then what's coming up in what they're doing in Washington now economically is on the planning front. So I talked before about Biden's tax plan and the fact that if it goes through, if he wins and it goes through, there's going to be some pretty significant changes. And I got a lot of feedback to the topic about the lack of the loss of deductibility of IRA and 401k deductions. Sorry, 401k deduction, IRA deduction. In his plan, I got a lot of feedback to that one, a lot. And so I wanted to touch upon that a little bit because we ended up purple, it is unlikely that his tax plan will go through as proposed. It's almost certainly going to be negotiations, and a lot of things will be dropped off. So I would, at this point, I don't have anything to back this, but I would say that's an area that probably will drop off. They are going to look at ways to give some form of tax credit to people who are in such a low income bracket they're not receiving the tax benefit, but not necessarily get rid of the deductibility at the higher, more highly compensated workers. So anybody in a tax bracket above proposed number was 26% would basically start to phase out the deductibility of their 401ks, which to me was kind of crazy from a government standpoint, because the government gets all this money back. When you start to take the distributions from your 401ks and IRAs, not only the original contribution is taxed, but all of the growth. So long term, if the government takes away that deductibility, they actually will take away their ability to generate that revenue, tax revenue in the future. And I would say, given the cost and the size and the of managing Social Security and Medicare and Medi-Cal programs, it's really critically important that the government gets this money in the future. So from an economic standpoint, from a fiscal responsibility standpoint, I really hope that they don't do it, as well as the fact that it will meaningfully change people's ability to save for their future. So a little bit of my opinion on that one, but I think that's one that might get dropped off, but I do see the tax credit coming through for people that are below that point, to be able to give them more benefit to saving for their future. So these are the things they're going to talking about right now. Guess what? This is bipartisan, purple, going with the purple here. But this is what's being talked about right now. A savers credit for low income people. That's what I talked about. So basically getting tax credits for saving in your retirement plan, saving for the future. Companies automatically enrolling not just full time, but part time people as well. In addition to that, they also are looking at ways to allow groups. They're starting with nonprofits, not for profits right now, but let's say multiple nonprofits coming together and forming their own retirement, their own 401k plans or 403b plans. So we will take away a lot of the cost and some of the complexity in putting them together and whatnot. So those are all some pretty interesting things. Um, here's the goodies. Eliminate the age restriction for contributions. So currently now there's age restrictions on how old you are when you can contribute to your 401ks. If you get to a certain age, you can't contribute anymore, or to your IRAs. That's something that they're looking to eliminate, especially in the IRA space. Raise the required minimum distribution age to 75. So it used to be 70 and a half. Under the Secure Act that passed in January, it went up to 72. They're talking about raising that to 75, which would be an excellent thing because many people are working a lot longer, and having to pull money out of your retirement when you're still working, not only do you not need the money, but you're also going to pay a lot more in taxes. So being able to, doesn't mean you have to wait till 75. Don't get alarmed there, but the ability to wait longer is going to be a big deal. Another one that I'm actually really excited about this. I'm more excited. The fact is bipartisan is the fact that I think this might actually happen, is giving. So you're aware of how employers can match 401k contributions, but they're looking at being able to match in the 401k when an employee uses the money instead of putting it in the 401k to paying down student loan debt. So imagine that someone young with a high amount of student loan debt, putting money aside for the retirements, probably a long off thing. And, Katie could probably tell us a whole lot about that. What's the right thing to do? But imagine if an employee with student loan debt could make payments towards that, and then the employer makes a match in their 401k. Great way to help people coming out of college with debt be able to save for their future. So this is just in its talking stage, but this shows you this is happening literally this week. They're working on this. So we got some purple going on here with some bipartisan work, and all of this can be beneficial. All of these things are enhancing and not taking away from, which makes it likely to pass and also likely to be beneficial to most people. So with that being said, I'm going to jump into the questions really quickly, and then I'm going to hand it over to Katie. See here. What is the risk if Trump doesn't concede? I think I covered that one pretty well. There's really not much economic risk because the president doesn't technically have to concede. The process will go through. And I'm not picking on the guy or saying this will happen, but even if they have to drag him out kicking and screaming, there's a process for that as well. I don't see it as a risk to the markets. And I think it's more likely to go smoother than we may expect than not to. But at this point, not something that I'm concerned of on an investing front. Other fronts, maybe. Let's see, COVID cases rising. Will we shut down again? I think I covered that one pretty well. It's highly unlikely. One thing to consider, because there was kind of a reference here towards around other countries. England and some European countries tried to shut down again, and it did not go very well. It didn't really help with the case rates, and there was a lot of protests and a lot of resistance, people refusing to do it because of the effects it had. I don't think in this country, where there's a lot more people wanting to do their own thing, that a forced major shutdown is really going to fly. Our testing method for determining positive cases is much more sensitive than other countries. I'm probably not using the right medical terminology here, but the viral load to determine a positive case in the United States is much lower than the viral load to determine a positive case in other countries. So we can't compare our case rates to other countries because of the difference in testing. I'm in no way saying that's a good or a bad thing, because that's not my area of expertise. There's probably a good reason for that, but we always have to look at how things are being tested before we can compare one to the other. But the rising case rates, I think the biggest effects are going to be the areas that have opened up might close down a little bit, some businesses and whatnot. The other concern around this is a lot of businesses have been able to stay open by doing outdoor activities. As the weather turns, in much of the nation, how will that continue is a big question. Now, is it possible to continue it, but also will companies invest in that if they don't know if that's going to be enough? And that's going to be a challenge. So the rising case rates is going to be an impact on many, many businesses, but I don't see it as a major economic effect yet. Yet. I'll keep you posted. Um, Status of the stimulus. They're talking again. They're kind of nibbling around the edges of it. Both sides, both the Senate and the House, have said they want to get this done. They want to get it done by year end. I don't know if that means passed by year end or agreed on. They weren't very clear, but they are talking. They're actively talking behind the scenes on getting the stimulus going. The election's over. There's no need to try to score political points, and it's going to happen. It won't be the big $3 trillion money for everything. It's going to be much more targeted, but it's going to go through, and I would say sooner rather than later. And they are actively working on the stimulus. So fingers crossed, because a lot of people's unemployment benefits expire at the end of this year. So there is a really big time is of the essence on this, and they are talking. Let's see, real estate, good investment, question mark. I guess real estate question, I think almost every time, and it's not even the same people. It depends. I think there's a lot of brilliant realtors in all different markets that can probably speak to that more specifically. So I will just say overall, it depends on what it is you're trying to accomplish. Is it an investment? Is it a home that you want to buy? What are the markets like? I would strongly advise talking to people who are experts in that. On your own personal level, talk to us because we can talk to you about the planning around that. But again, it's too broad of a question. It's not specific, so I don't really feel comfortable saying it's good or it's bad. But talk to me individually. I'm more than happy to go further with that or get you in front of a really good realtor who can better advise. Invest in the vaccine companies. Okay, question mark. Healthcare and is tech overvalued? All right, so I'm going to wrap this up with my last question. Hard to invest in the companies that are producing the vaccines because it's still really unknown what the profit margin for the companies is going to be. However, there's many places you can invest in if the vaccines are successful in healthcare and outside of healthcare. So there are tremendous opportunities there, but trying to pick the winners, really tough to do accurately because there's a lot of unknown around that. Is tech overvalued? It depends on the company. I can't give it direct investment recommendations on this forum. Overall, technology is not going anywhere, but there's going to be probably a lot slower growth in certain companies that have done very well. Okay, do you see a work from home tax coming to the US, like what's being proposed in Germany to offset the revenue losses? I would never underestimate our government's willingness to tax us in any way they can. They need the money, they want the money and need the money. And it's possible, but that's also very vague. What does that mean and what will it mean to us? Some people are working from home because they're required to. Other people are working from home because they choose to. Some people are working from home temporarily, some days a week, and some people are working from home. There's too many variances in there. So I'm not sure how they would be able to exactly tax that. The companies would be able to precisely tax that. The government would be precisely able to tax. Do they tax the companies? Do they tax the workers? There's a lot of uncertainty around that. But overall, I think we're going to have a lot of creative and new taxes around this. California has had a tremendous outflow of residents during this time of COVID, tremendous outflow, primarily to states like Texas, I think is number one, Nevada number two, but spread across the country. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I've talked about it at length before, but people are moving, and California really depends on that revenue. So would they look for revenue from other sources? Possibly. But remember, if one state does it and another one doesn't, guess where people start moving? Guess where companies start moving? So unless it's done at a national level, I think it's unlikely to be anything meaningful. But again, my giant caveat is I won't be surprised if they try, and I wouldn't be surprised if there are taxes kind of tied around the new reality of how we work. The impacts to cities. Well, I was doing some analysis on college towns, and college towns depend on those college students being there. And some of these cities are really, really suffering. San Francisco is really, really suffering right now. The loss of revenue in these cities, it's stunning, and it's long term, and they don't get to print money like the federal government. So this is really, really hitting cities and states when people are moving and businesses are shut down. And I do think that there's going to be creative new ways. I think the first place that it'll go to is towards the tech companies, because they're the ones that are making the money and are less impacted by COVID. But again, we'll see. I'll keep an eye on that one. Good question, though. All right, with that being said, I'm going to hand this over to Katie Linfeld. For those of you on this call have not heard her speak before, I'll give her a brief introduction. Katie and I have worked together since the beginning of Sequoia. She is a brilliant certified financial planner, and she's got a lot of expertise in how to optimize things on a personal level between the various things of taxes and planning and goals. And the big complexity in financial planning is people hear, oh, I should do this, a news blurb, something from a friend. But each piece, each decision you make fits like a puzzle within everything else in your life. And it's so important to get that integrated and implemented with your personal situation. So today she's going to talk about some ideas and some thoughts around some things that are very unique to 2020, some of them, and some of them are just in general really good ideas and thoughts. What our hopes are, if you're clients of ours, we're already taking care of this for you. But if you also do consider sharing this with other people in your lives that you know that may be looking at financial planning, they don't have to hire us, but it'll give them some ideas to talk to their advisors about or to use in their own planning. So with that being said, I am going to shut myself down for a moment intentionally this time and let Katie speak. So bye for now.
All right, well, I'll talk about video till Kristina is able to start that on her end. And I am Katie Linfeld. I am the certified financial planner here at Sequoia Wealth Advisors, and I work with individuals throughout the Bay Area and really around the nation, looking at how do you optimize your finances to fit your goals. Like Kristina said, we got some particular opportunities to this year and what we've got available. That is, always the case because economies are changing and our laws change, particularly in regards to tax laws. There's always nuances and ways things affect in different components. This year, one of the biggest changes is still looking at the CARES Act and what that can mean to individuals. A big part of that is still in effect and still an option for folks here towards the end of the year is putting your hand into your 401k. If you are what they're calling a coronavirus related individual, where you would qualify for a coronavirus related distribution, means that you have tested positive, your spouse has tested positive, or you've had a substantial financial hardship because of the virus, meaning loss of job and such, as your employer has the option within the 401k to allow for much larger distributions within the plan with the normal ramifications taken away. Normally, if you are not yet 60 and you withdraw from your 401k, my quick back the napkin math is you can have 50% of that. About 50% goes to taxes.
Hey, yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you. It's Kristina. You have to turn your camera on now.
Is it going to let me do it now? Oh, wonderful. Thanks. So normally you lose about 50% to taxes. Quick calculations there with the 10% penalty. Within the CARES Act, there's special regulations there that allow for that 10% penalty to be gone. And then particularly, you can also spread the taxes on that distribution over 3 years. That's a real big difference because it's going to hit your taxes to a much smaller amount by spreading it out. Why would you consider doing this? In general, I don't want you to touch your 401k. The point of that is that it's going to stay there for a while and grow. You get the benefit of not paying taxes on that growth each year. And usually it's for long run issues, long run planning. Why would we touch it ahead of time? There's some pretty cool options. The big one is that you can pull it out and put it back in a few years. You don't have to just pay the taxes. You could actually recontribute it. So there could be strategic reasons within your personal budget where it may make sense. Hey, let's pull that out for a year or two and then put it back in for whatever that reason could be for yourselves. You can also, in some situations, make that be a Roth conversion, a way where if your income is much less this year, pull it out and do a conversion, reducing some taxes there. You could also just straight up do a Roth conversion this year if your taxes are lower, if you are not a coronavirus related individual or qualify for this distribution component. So Roth conversions are something I look at real frequently with clients, which just within my baseline reviews of plans, I'm always looking, might this be a year that makes sense? Roth conversions in long run success are spectacular. Let's take money and turn it from something that is going to have to pay taxes on in the future as ordinary income and make it where you never have to pay taxes on it again. For many people, the challenge there is that once you feel like you can afford to do so, you're in a high enough tax bracket that's pretty painful. So within planning, I'm looking at when would it strategically make more sense? Yes, the pain of the taxes today is better for the long run. So that's, if you've had a bizarre year tax-wise, it maybe makes sense to consider conversion in 2020. You've got, 6 weeks here. Really, you have about a month. There's a lot of paperwork components, and so many companies have a cutoff date about mid-December for such things. So that's a worthwhile, calculation if you do your own taxes, or a quick note over to your accountant to see just what would the tax hit be for something like that. And the other component is that if you do qualify for one of these withdrawals and you pull it out, you can recontribute it to a different plan. So let's say you worked at your employer for a long time and you have a very large 401k. Maybe you would like some diversification in your retirement plan savings, and you don't want it all invested just in those 25 available funds at your company. You can do that withdrawal and then put it into an IRA. That counts as recontributing it, so you don't have to pay any taxes. Normally when you do that, it's challenging to get away to not have a 20% required federal tax withholding on it. And so you'd have to come up with that 20% out of pocket and then get the 20% back on your taxes. But this year, that withholding has been waived. So you could take it out of your 401k and put it into an IRA. That could be a neat way to get some diversification, to invest more specifically in your beliefs and things you really would like to invest in. So that's more on the opportunistic side. Could be an interesting way to do so if you're going to continue to work with that employer a while longer, but you'd like to do some other things with that savings. The other pieces here is, let's say you really would like to do these things, but your employer hasn't allowed it. They've got some amendment options still available to them. So you could reach out to HR and say, hey, I'd like to do this. Would it be possible? They still have time to make those amendments to allow you to get into those plan options there. The other thing that's massive within the CARES Act for many folks is required minimum distributions. I've talked about this before on these webinars, but 2020, we had two huge changes to require minimum distributions. A massive simplification in the calculation of when you need to start just withdrawing from your retirement account. Used to be the very obnoxious year following the year in which you turn 70 and a half, particularly annoying for people born in July. It's a fussy calculation. There was a staggering between the first year and the second year. It was awkward. They simplified it, and it is now the year you turn 72. Much more simple, a lot easier to figure out. These are required minimum distributions. You can take it before then. It's just now you have to start doing it. As I always say, you have not yet paid taxes, and the IRS would like their taxes now, please. But due to the CARES Act, they waived 2020 distributions. This does not mean you don't have to do it for this year. You have to make up for it next year. Truthfully, that would be really painful because then you'd have a double withdrawal in 21. That would make your income from these accounts double, as well as it's more challenging on your investments. That's an extra big withdrawal from the investment. This was because the markets dropped so much in the spring. So the calculations were based on those really high numbers back in December. And so they said, no, you don't have to take one in 2020. If you're 72 or above and been always taking them, it might be a year to look and say, hey, should I hold off? Should I just not take a distribution this year? The one problem is that you could, if you'd already started taking up until August, you could have put money back in. We're past that now. So it's just, if you haven't yet, you don't need to this year. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't. It really depends on your personal situation, what makes sense there. And that's a piece we do within financial planning, is looking with people at their plans. Would it make sense to take it anyway, to better spread your taxes over the long term? Like I had said, we want taxes, not big chunks, but more spread throughout. That tends to equal less tax payment in the long run. Smaller tax payment means you get to keep more money in your pocket. All in all, does better there. So you still can do that. Another piece that was kind of talked about being a bit off the table there is one of my favorite ways to donate to charity. If you are 72, one of the best ways to donate to charity, we have two options. One, which is available to anyone, directly donating highly appreciated assets. The charities, if they're a 501c3, they do not pay capital gains when they sell that highly appreciated asset. So that stock you bought that has done spectacularly, if you donate the physical stock, not selling it first, to the charity, they then sell it on their end. They don't pay the capital gains. You get the charitable deduction of the value of the stock on the date you donated it. That's a win-win. You didn't pay the taxes there and then donate cash. But the other one that's spectacular is if you're 72 or above, you can donate your RMD. So you tell the financial institution, I would like this fund sent to XYZ charity. The check is made out directly to the charity, and it counts as a distribution from your account, but you don't have to, so you don't get the itemized deduction. But if you weren't taking an itemized deduction, you may not have gotten much benefit from a charitable contribution, and now you are. Not as big of an impact this year, but a great thing for next year when you're back on those RMDs. Look at what you might be donating to charities. It's also an easier way for them to receive the money, right? They just get a check in the mail saying came from you, and it hits that RMD. So if you were not needing all of your RMD, or even if you were, but you were donating some to charity, very simple way, if you're not utilizing a charitable deduction on your itemized taxes, to consider it that way. Just takes a little bit of paperwork with the custodian holding your IRA, because they got to know where they're sending it and such. But that's another fantastic option for folks. One thing Kristina mentioned that just, like Kristina, we're always percolating on how these things play out. I do think that the student loan as a matching component in a 401k is a fascinating option. We'll be really interested to see how that plays out. Could be an interesting way for the government to help with the student loan crisis, and at a significantly lower cost than any of the other plans, such as wiping away debt and such. A lot of planning I do with real young folks is, balancing those three concerns. I know I need to save for the long term, but I have debt. And also I think if I want to keep living here, I probably need to buy a house at some point in time. So how do they balance that? And usually I'm focusing a fair bit on that debt, because if we reduce the outflow, it makes the other pieces easier for the long run. if they could be paying down that debt and still getting the match in their plan, I'm assuming you would still have some sort of a vesting schedule, protect the company, and they're benefiting their employees, but that could really be a neat planning tool and could be a really great option for employers within their plan to offer, just as for young employees coming out who might otherwise not be as interested in the plan, how they'll fit into some of the testing and highly compensated things. Anyone who's a small business owner may have a bit of an idea of what I'm talking about there as they're looking to fund their personal side of the 401k. Those pieces, of course, will have to get figured out. But as I look towards longer run and as things change, I think that could be a fascinating and, relatively low cost on the governmental side, a way to help within the student loan crisis and those challenges there. So the other things I do personally, and I recommend to my clients the end of the year, we look at what Kristina does in the investment world, look at tax loss harvesting. Is there anything we really should sell to make sure those taxes hit in this year? Like she said, with a purple Congress, we are much less concerned about where taxes are going, drastically next year. So we were very highly looking at, to what level should we take gains this year, just to protect from the possibility of the future. We still are looking that way for clients, but not with quite the huge level of risk in that regard. But that's still something everyone should look at towards the end of the year, especially if you manage your own investments. What can you do there to keep more of what you've gotten? Then the other piece is just some basic housekeeping. End of the year is a fantastic time to look over your spending and see where it has gone. And then particularly to look at reoccurring charges. We live in such a digital electronic age where we are signed up for things and have things coming, that it's a real good time to double check all of that. Do you still want those things? Have the combined numbers, changed? One of my things to do, signed up for Hulu a year ago and my rate is raising. So I was thinking about it, right? Do I still value it as much at this new rate as I did a year ago? Because when you add all of the various things together, that's where we can really get some of the creep in that discretionary spending bucket. And what we don't spend is what we have the option to keep and invest and really set ourselves up for success in the real long run. So I highly recommend a quick look through your spending. I know there is, if you're an iPhone user, within the App Store, within the settings, there's a spot where you can go look anything you've subscribed in. So if you've subscribed to anything that way, a handy way to look and see, hey, what have I subscribed? Is there anything I want to unsubscribe to? Also a good thing to do with loved ones who need a bit more help in these regards. Younger kids, with the elderly, something I do with my grandma. Let's see if grandma inadvertently subscribed to anything, and such. Just a little bit of housekeeping, getting set up for the next year, just having a little better control of your own in those regards. And those are some of the big quick points I wanted to make there. Looking at what do you need to do as you go into the new year. I'd have to say on the planning side, it's a little simpler than it was a few weeks ago. A little bit less eminently time sensitive. I'm going to check this here in the Q&A. I know we've got one about RMDs. If we're going to be taxed on RMD distributions, even though we did not take them this year or in 2021, excuse me. So RMD distributions, the taxation is in the year you take them. So you're taxed when the money comes out. Therefore, if you did not take a 2020 distribution, you will not be taxed on it. If you did take one and didn't get it back in before August, then yes, you will be taxed for 2020 for that distribution. The current law has distributions restarting back in 2021. So you'll need to start taking them again. And then will be taxed in 2021 for those distributions. And I think those are the main pieces there. Kristina, anything else you want me to cover at this time? Please jump in.
Oh, you actually was perfect. I was going to read the question to you and you got it. So I guess I will hop back over, answer the last question that came through, and sign off. Katie, thank you so much for all of your wisdom and your ideas and your strategies. I can't stress enough, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, even with questions. Our rule is we want to be in service at this time to as many people as possible to help them through these times and beyond. Even if you're not ready to work with us, just reach out and ask questions. If you are seeing this webinar or you're seeing a copy of this webinar, you can reach out to us and have your questions answered. So don't hesitate to do so. And if you're our clients, please also reach out to us as well. So that being said, thank everyone very much again for attending these webinars or sharing them with other people. I so greatly enjoy this time. I feel like I'm with you, even though I can't actually see you. And again, of being in service and helping and giving guidance and advice during these times. Please do not hesitate to reach out to us if you have additional questions on anything we've talked about today or something else. And again, look forward to doing this again early December with our special guest. So you get to hear from more than just us on the webinar. So look for that. And any ideas you have of future events, please let us know. We'll make it happen. Also, we have a special cooking class coming up. We're going to do this in a gallery view. We're all going to see one another. We're going to have Chef Deborah Costello back teaching us how to make some really amazing holiday treats, desserts and whatnot. So it should be great fun. It will be a group setting. And share this with your family. Share it with your friends. The cooking class, it's not business. Think about those that may be very isolated and alone in these times. Maybe would just love to participate with us. Even if they just watch, they don't have to cook. Thank you all so very much. Greatly appreciate this time with you. Greatly appreciate your questions. And I look forward to not only seeing you in person, seeing you on video, talking to you, and hopefully in the not too distant future, all getting together again in a group event. Thank you very much and have a great afternoon. Bye for now.